Hello, everyone, and hello, Martin.
Hi.
So today I'm really excited to talk with Maarten Fokkelman. He is the founder and CEO of a uh, management content agency based in the Netherlands. And what we're going to talk about is the overlap between leadership in day-to-day using conscious leadership, as well as the challenges that show up in general. And we've come up with some questions that are pertinent because Martin does actually use conscious leadership in his practice. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so the first question, something that you brought up when we did our prep session, is something I've been hearing a lot about from leaders, and that pertains to the concept of trust being one of the most important things that leaders need to establish. And you said that there's a Dutch saying, trust walks in and rides out on a horse.
Yes.
So how do we say that?
In Dutch we say, vertrouwen komt te voet en gaat te paard.
Okay. So, and as I've been thinking about that, there's this other saying that we all have, I think it's global, that you can't please everyone. And the more I think about the challenges that we face on a day-to-day, it's really making tough decisions that are going to disappoint some people, but then how do you not lose trust with them? So that's my first question for you. What are your thoughts around kind of the intersection between those two truths?
Yeah. So my thoughts on this is you're absolutely right. You cannot make everyone happy, at least not all the time. And maybe it's also not something to be strived for. I guess there's some balance between trying to make people happy, but also meeting your business objectives. Sometimes they are in opposition, of course. And I think if you are able to establish a strong foundation of trust between people within the firm, then you can also make decisions that they might not like, but at least they will understand. And so this requires not just trust, but also clear communication and openness on why you are making a certain decision. So I for sure had, in many different cases, situations where we had to make a tough decision, and we were not that good in explaining it clearly to our staff. And then that is where there is some friction between the trust we already have, and there's a decision they might not understand because we did not give them the right context to understand why we were taking the decision. So ideally, I would say is if you have that foundation of trust, you can also additionally, you should look into explaining why you are making a certain decision. And then, yeah, I mean, of course, there would be certain situations or decisions if they deem it very unfair, it either requires a lot of explanation, or you will have to see, why am I making this decision? And does it really align with the core values of the company? So that's also definitely an aspect.
So, and that really pops another question into my mind, which is, do you think a company or a leader who is practicing conscious leadership, and we'll go into now maybe what is your definition of that, but do you think that it's going to be potentially more difficult for them because they've created a certain type of relationship with their employees, or might it actually be less difficult to deal with these situations?
I guess it's both. Probably starting out with a conscious leadership model is harder because it's a process and it's a road. It's really a journey to discover how to do that well. And for us, so I have one business partner in my firm, and for him and for me, but also for our management team, it's been also a process of discovery, and finding out what is important to us, what are our core values, and how do we treat certain situations. And many situations at some point are not that difficult. You can make an easy call or decision, but sometimes different goals or values are in opposition. So it could be, maybe I'll think of an example soon, but that some of the core values, you want to be driven and ambitious in reaching your goals, but one of our core values is being connected. So if you want the connection between the humans, the people being involved, but you also want to be ambitious and driven, there are certain situations where those two core values get to be in conflict with each other. And so what to do then? And I guess there's always some edge where it's difficult. And sometimes, yeah, I guess if you're not adopting the conscious leadership model, but just more a traditional model of going after targets, yeah, some decisions will be easier to make, but then the fallout or the consequences of that decision again may be more difficult than if you take the time and you make a decision and you explain it and you try to get the people on board and come along with you in that decision, even if they are not all happy with every aspect of it. Then I think in the long run, the conscious leadership model, yeah, has more benefits, or at least it creates an environment we are more happy with, also as leaders, but also our colleagues. Yeah, of course, like many things, it depends.
So when you're talking about this, some people watching might not even understand what we're saying about conscious leadership. These are,
yeah.
What is it in your mind?
All right, good question. So I don't have one cookie cutter definition. However, to me, it means to be in alignment with what we value most, with our core values, and to try to make an effort as good as possible to live those values and to be conscious of not just our own aims and what we need for ourselves, but also of our environment. And this includes staff, it includes the client, but it also includes the world at large, the environment. So how do we take all the different interests into account when we do what we do?
And so what would you say, and another way I could have asked that question that might have been easier is, what do you see as the benefits? And how long have you been when were you first introduced to it as well? That might be.
Yeah, I don't know if there was really one moment we were introduced to it. It's rather been coming under our attention gradually, and you read something, you hear something, you see someone model a particular example, and then yeah, over time we've become more and more committed to trying to run our business in this way. And often, like a simple rule of thumb we use is, how would we want the company to be if we were an employee? Because many of the decisions primarily involve or have an effect on our employees. So also to take their interest into consideration. Of course, that does not mean that if someone comes to our desk and say, hey, I would like a raise, that we say, oh, that's good for the employee, let's do it. And then, I mean, yeah, there are still constraints, of course, but we have to weigh those. And when weighing constraints and when weighing pros and cons of decisions, we also take into account the bigger picture, and we try to be fair for as much as we can be.
Okay. And for example, you had shared with me when we talked that you've seen a benefit being that millennials are actually drawn to this style of leadership. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, personally, I think officially I'm kind of on the edge of the millennials and the previous generation. But for sure, we have people working for a firm that are much more millennial than I am, and look at the world through a different lens, and they don't want to have a car, which in Europe or in Holland is pretty doable actually. But they look at the world in a different way, probably also for the good in the long run, I think. But an example I hear now more and more often is 20-year-olds that are at the end of their university studies and they are considering where to take a job. So 15 years ago, when it was me, I'm like, oh, consulting might be interesting. Should I go into investment banking? There are many interesting things. But the younger generation, many of them say investment banking, hell no. And I'm not working for Shell and I'm not working for Monsanto. And I want to contribute to the world and not do harm. So I'm a bit exaggerating, maybe. I don't really know. But for sure, a lot of the young people that come to work for our firm, they take all these things into account. And yeah, I guess any generation is different from the previous one, but yeah, it's a clear difference, and they also look in a different way to the topic of work-life balance. So we have people that say when they're 26, look, I want to work 4 days a week, and I ask, okay, wow, that's interesting. Why? Because when I was 26, it would never come up in my mind to do that. And they say, yeah, well, I play guitar and I have some hobbies. I want some time for myself. And they prioritize differently. And for me, it was, okay, I want to attain this, be successful. And yeah, so there is a shift with the generation of 20 years ago, for sure.
And what about when it comes to vulnerability? That's another thing that we talked about. How do you see that being part of being a conscious leader? And what are some of the challenges and or benefits that creates?
I think it plays a big role. It ties into what we just spoke about, that if you want to have a relationship or more even a culture where people deal with each other in a certain way, then I think vulnerability is both important and valuable, but not necessarily easy to do always. Like trust, one of the models I need to think of, you probably heard of it, is it's from the book The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and there's this pyramid.
I love that book.
If you want to be very successful, then I don't know if it was the first layer of the pyramid, but probably trust is very important. But that also implies one needs to be able to be vulnerable, and that means for me, if I how do you say this in English? If I don't show what I'm thinking, and if I don't seem all too human because I'm only making the rational business decision, I'm only going for the short term or the financial goals, and I don't show much of myself, my insecurities, the things I struggle with, it's harder for people to relate with me, right? And if I want to be really working together effectively with my colleagues, the management team, but also some other staff members that I work a lot with, yeah, the trust and the vulnerability is important to work together in the most effective way. But then if I want them to be vulnerable, in my experience, it's important to model this behavior first. And over the years, I've become better or less bad at this. And yeah, I try to make a conscious effort to also show, look, maybe I seem very put together when I walk into the office in the morning, but of course there's also a list of topics that I am uncertain about. I have my own struggles to deal with and my own, some characteristics that brought me very far, but are also now hindering me being an effective leader. And to be able to have a conversation about that. And if I can do that with them, I hope, and I also see that the bar is lower for them to also be vulnerable with us. So those are my thoughts on vulnerability.
Oh, I really love that. So the base ingredient there is being able to be aware of those things yourself, because I think sometimes that can seem like either scary or a distraction for people in general, just self-awareness in general.
Yeah.
We want to only believe the good things about ourselves, or maybe we want to just forget or like hide the other things. But this is this interesting truth that in order to be vulnerable and to share and to show people that, look, you can grow really far. Like, I didn't just pop out like this. That you first need to be able to recognize that you didn't just pop out this way, and don't project that. So I think that I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can do a part 2 in a few minutes. I'm going to adjust my camera. Okay.
Sure.
So when it comes to moving quickly, making quick decisions, do you have any examples of where you had to consciously like grip yourself and say, okay, I would love to move much more quickly, but I know that this is going to be detrimental to what we're building?
Yes. That was the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I'm not always very quick at finding a good example, but surely this happens a lot of the time. Maybe a general example that probably many will recognize is you have a certain role in the company. You hire someone to fulfill that role, but they're not quite at the bar yet. So they need some training, they need some experience, but they have a lot of potential. So you think, okay, let's take half a year to really train them properly and get to where we want to be, because if we have this guy or this girl in that seat, it'll really help us forward. But then you need to take the time to get them at the level they can attain, but it takes some time, it takes some experience. And then we've often made a decision like this, but then it also means that in those months, or at least I believe, that we kind of owe it to ourselves and to them to also be patient with their process. And some stuff may seem really easy to me because I've already dealt with it, or for me it came more natural. And I can become impatient in those situations. And so I've often had to kind of remind myself, okay, I can show them how to do it, but then they don't really learn. Or I can tell them, okay, let me take the call, make the sale, do this thing, review this paper or this product. But for them to learn it, it really requires a bit more time investment, a bit more patience. And so this is really an ongoing struggle. There's always a few people that still have certain skills to learn. I'm no different in that respect. But for me to take the time to get them there, I would love to move faster. And if I would do it myself, it would go faster. And I guess this is one of the first things when you build the company. You're 5 people in size. It's very easy to do everything yourself, but if you want to get to a company of 100 people or even more, you cannot keep doing everything yourself. So you need to take the time, invest the time, be patient, and to get your staff or your people to do it in their way. And this is sometimes frustrating. So I surely recognize that.
Yeah, that's a great example. And what you're doing is you're prioritizing the value of creating an environment where people are growing and becoming their best version of themselves. And you're prioritizing that for that person, and that you're prioritizing that culture over like achieving the thing immediately.
And actually building culture. So I was just talking on the level of one individual, but building the culture is maybe even a better example, because it takes sometimes a lot of time, effort, patience, to implement certain changes, or to get the culture to change in a certain way, or something to become normal within the company. That, I mean, when I have the idea in my mind, I would like the culture to be like this, it's usually a long way from actually getting it there. And then if I look back 1 or 2 years, I think, oh, we've made a lot of progress. But if I look back 1 week, or if I look ahead a few weeks, I'm like, this stuff is going so slow. Why don't people get this? Why don't they? Okay, they're not mind readers, so I understand why it doesn't happen that way. But yeah, hell, it's exercising patience, and it's definitely not one of my strong sides or strengths to be very patient. And I imagine many entrepreneurs are generally a bit more impatient than others. Yeah.
I can relate. Not that I'm in that community, but I can definitely relate. Okay, so we're going to take a little break and then we'll create a round two.
Perfect.